So please welcome Justin Arthur.
Hi everybody, I'm Justin from the Walt Disney Archives. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Walt Disney Archives and what we do and how I ended up here, but more importantly about the company and how we've ended up here 90 years after the company started. So as Walt Disney once said, we have a lot of story yet to tell, and that's very true today even as we're here. So let's get started. All right. Well, another thing that Walt always said was that it all started with a mouse, and I think the short that we just saw proves that Mickey is still going strong 90 years later. And but with the archives, it actually all started with a person in 1970, and that was when Dave Smith, who was the founder of the archives, decided that somebody should come into the company and start collecting things that are significant to its history. And traditionally that hadn't been done, and so he was actually hired by Walt Disney's older brother Roy to come in and start collecting all of these sorts of things. And his first task was actually right here on the Walt Disney Studios lot, which is where I work, and that was to go in and catalog everything that was in Walt Disney's offices. Walt had passed away in 1966, just 4 years earlier. And so today we actually still have everything that was in Walt's office. That's actually a recreation that we put together last year at a big exhibit that we did in California at the Ronald Reagan Library. And interestingly, we actually consulted with the team that worked on Saving Mr. Banks about what was in Walt's office, and we actually gave them a tour of our replica of the office, and they thought it was very cool. So they did a very good job, I think, working on it. Since then, though, we've moved from just informational things and being more like a library to housing all sorts of things in our collection. We're lucky enough to have props and costumes and ride vehicles and all sorts of different things from all over the company, all over the world. I'm actually actively looking for things while I'm here to bring back for the archive, so I'm excited for that. We also have a photo library which has over 6 million photos of the company's history, from movies, TV, theme parks, cruise line, all sorts of things. And doesn't mean we can't have some fun in the archives every now and then. But we keep all of this stuff not only in our offices but in warehouses, and in those warehouses we have everything from the press preview invitation from Disneyland when it opened in 1955 to Cursed Pirate Treasure, to the original Sleeping Beauty storybook that opened at the beginning of that film in 1959. Since then, we've been able to move into doing much bigger things and really exciting exhibits in the past few years. This is actually an exhibit we did just a few months ago at the D23 Expo in Japan. And it was really a great way to be able to reach out to the fans there and bring them a lot of things that they hadn't seen before. And so that's the Princess Room, and we also had a nice pirate display as well for the theme parks and the films. But the biggest exhibit we've ever done was actually the one that I mentioned that was at the Ronald Reagan Library. And that one had everything from Mad Tea Parties to White Rabbits to giant dragon heads from Fantasmic at Disneyland to pirate costumes, and the largest thing in our collection, which is a 25-foot long pirate ship that was used in the Pirates of the Caribbean films. That's one of the Black Pearls, the largest one that they actually built. And it's in our collection. But let's go way, way, way back to long before our collection even started, but to something that actually now is there. This is Walt Disney's house that he was born in Chicago, Illinois, on December 5th, 1901. And it was in that house that his father built on Tripp Avenue that he was born in. At that time, he didn't get a birth certificate because he was born at home. So the closest thing that was ever created for Walt to prove that he was born was a certificate of baptism that his church gave him. And we actually have that in the archives that was given to us by Walt's brother Roy. And that's actually a nice little baby photo of Walt there. A few years later, Walt's family moved to the Midwest, to a very small town that was very rural and lots of farms around, called Marceline, Missouri. And even though he moved from the big city to the middle of nowhere, Walt loved it. He was 4 years old and he couldn't complain. He was surrounded by animals all the time, which was kind of the beginning of his inspirations for a lot of characters, he always said, was that he was surrounded by animals. And so that's actually his little sister Ruth Disney there. and she kept a journal that we have now in the archive. She actually gave it to us, and it had all sorts of things in it chronicling her childhood, but also some interesting things from her brother. That's a drawing that Walt did as a child. He was actually pretty talented. He claims that the first drawing he ever did that he was paid for was when he lived in Marceline, and a man gave him a nickel for drawing a horse. But he wanted to be, at that time, an editorial cartoonist, and draw cartoons for newspapers. And at the time, animation wasn't really a thing, but when he finally started to learn more about animation, he decided that that's what he knew he wanted to do. And so he moved to Kansas City a few years later and started a small company called Laugh-O-Gram Films. And they created a few somewhat successful shorts over the years and different things, but unfortunately it went bankrupt. And so in 1923, Walt decided, well, he didn't really have much else, and he got up and moved from Kansas City to California. And so he moved in with his uncle Robert in Hollywood, and he actually started his first California studio in Uncle Robert's garage. He was working on some films, and he had actually completed one film, which he brought along with him. And this film was an early idea that he had of putting a live-action little girl in a cartoon environment. And so this was one of the very first cartoons that he made, which was called Alice's Wonderland. And it was a silent film. And it actually went on to inspire 56 in total of those Alice comedies, and they were very successful. And they actually were what sort of started our company, because the contract that Walt signed for that very first film on October 16th, 1923, is the contract that founded what we now know as the Walt Disney Company. And we actually have that in the archives as well, which is pretty cool, and it's pretty important, seeing as the company is 90 years old now. This is how we know is that original document. So after the Alice comedies, Walt launched a new series of films with a brand new character that he created called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The first film he was in was Poor Papa. The first released film was actually called Trolley Troubles. And in all, Walt produced 26 of these Oswald cartoons, which were being distributed by Universal at the time. And unfortunately, Walt kind of didn't come out too great on this deal, because in 1928, just 1 year after he created Oswald, he got bad news from those distributors that they actually owned the rights to the character and they were taking him. So they hired away most of Walt's animators, and Walt was left with little more than one of his friends, Ub Iwerks, who was an animator, and coming up with new ideas. So all he had was his imagination, really. But he did come up with another character that I think has done pretty well for himself. This is actually a memo that Walt wrote to the president of Universal a few years later, Carl Lumley, in 1935, and this was after Mickey had already been successful. But it kind of shows that Walt, even though he learned a lesson from that, he didn't really hold hard feelings against the company that took the character. So, of course, this leads us to Mickey Mouse. Walt had to come up with a new character in 1928, and him and Ub Iwerks got together and created this character they wanted to call Mortimer. But his wife Lillian decided, maybe Mickey's a better name. And so they ended up, they produced two cartoons actually before Steamboat Willie. They made Plain Crazy and Gallopin' Gaucho, which were both silent cartoons. But Walt knew that Mickey had to debut with something really big. So he decided that Mickey's debut would be a cartoon that would be the first ever film with synchronized sound. And that's part of why Mickey was so popular at the time, is because that had never really been done with a cartoon. And so Steamboat Willie premiered, and we actually have in the archives the original script from Steamboat Willie, which, interestingly, Walt actually kept in his desk for many years. A lot of people thought that Walt wasn't a very sentimental person who looked back, but when he passed away, this was actually still in his desk. So he never forgot where the company had started, just like we don't today. Another interesting thing in the archives is the original program from Steamboat Willie. In 1928, it premiered at the Colony Theater in New York. And the significance of this program was that for many years, the company didn't really know what Mickey's birthday was. They would just pick a random date. And in the 70s, Dave Smith, who founded the archives, actually established the official date of Mickey's birthday, which was November 18th, 1928. And that was because that's the day it premiered on this program, so that's how we know. So in the archives, we have all sorts of different things and all sorts of different merchandise, dating back to even Oswald merchandise from the 1920s to the very first Mickey Mouse merchandise product, which was a drawing tablet in 1930, and the very first Mickey Mouse watch, which was released in 1933 by the Ingersoll Company. And of course, we can't forget about Donald Duck merchandise either. So let's focus on this watch, though, because it has a pretty fun story behind it, and I'm going to open my